How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we're going to discuss inside the mind of a young shooter, the Colt Gray case. If you're not familiar with the Colt Gray case, I'll just read a little bit right now. Colt Gray is a 14-year-old. Let me show you his picture. Who was arraigned on 4 counts of felony murder and is expected to be tried as an adult following the Wednesday shooting that left 4 people dead. This happened at Appalachian High School in Georgia. The picture, the man to the left, is his father. Right now, he's under investigation, either because he bought the weapon for his son. So you definitely have that. You have access to a minor with a weapon. And then you also have, could be maybe he was involved in the planning of it all. We don't know yet at this point. But today our focus is going to be on the profile of a young active shooter. What causes them to decide that this is something that they want to do? My guest today is Joe. What's up, Joe? I can't hear you, Joe. You're muted.
There we
What's
go.
Up, Joe?
Morning, buddy.
Good. It's good to have you, Joe. Good. Joe, you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, sir. My name's Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice of 29 years and 6 months. And I'm currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division.
Thank you for coming on, Joe. Joe, this will be just a quick dialogue. I know it's a hot topic right now, so I thought we can kind of break down the profile of a young active shooter. I know in my experience, I've actually dealt with active shooters just basically through normal interaction and routine. I'm sure you have done the same, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
That's That's kind of what life is like for us as correctional professionals. But Joe, I do mention that during those interactions, we do learn a lot, even if we're not sitting there interviewing them about, what they've done. We get to discover who they really are behind the wall without the facade of, them feeling they have to impress or paint a picture. We get to know eventually who they are because it does leak out over time. Correct?
Yeah. Eventually, yeah. What's in the case is actually going to come out at some point. Whether it's leaked or inside source, at some point it does come out. Yeah.
Yes. So, guys, I know that when we look at an active shooter, the things that people are going to look at when it comes to discover motive or who this person is as an individual, they kind of focus on 4 main things. They focus on social dynamic. So maybe there's anything that could have happened that caused this individual to want to have revenge or retaliate. They also look at their mental health. They also look at their fascination with violence. So they'll look at things that the child does throughout the day, including violent video games. That's a big thing. And then they do the hindsight bias, the red flags, which is funny because, things seem to be more clearer after the incident already happens because there's more knowledge. So some of these red flags, if we're seeing it now, be advised, we're seeing it in a different context. We're seeing it within the end result of an active shooter. So, it kind of paints a picture that, I couldn't believe they missed the obvious. Well, it's remember, we have more context now. But Joe, I know right now when they try to figure out motive and all this stuff, they do fall into those 4 areas: social dynamic. We got mental health, fascination with violence, and red flags. And by the way, these all tend to bleed together. They're not isolated, but these are the 4 areas that they tend to focus on. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, that's what they initially will focus on, those four topics there, and sometimes one has a leading cause more than the other. So, but yeah, that's initially what they look at. They look at the student's background or the person's background, their social upbringing, current problems that they were having, any kind of history of mental health. There's a lot of things they take into consideration when they look into a person's background.
Now, you guys also have to remember this is a young kid, so they're trying to discover who they are. And with that said, once they break away from the parents and that identity, the next thing they start looking at is their peers. Their peers start to become a big influence on who they want to be to some extent. Now, if you are being bullied or you being pushed aside from those peers, that can make it very hard for that young child to discover their identity. But a more important thing here is to discover empathy. They're at a very young age, but if the whole world is against them, or they subjectively feel that the whole world is against them, what winds up happening is that they just don't feel empathy. They just wind up not developing empathy at its fullest. And that means that when they don't have that empathy, to them, a person is an object, it's an item. I'm not connected to feeling because I don't know what it's like to see from their perspective. And I don't want to take the time to see it because at the end of the day, I could really care less about who these people are. So I think part of it here is the lack of empathy. And then you also have the fact that in this person's mind, these individuals could just be objects, if you will. And again, this is an age that is very young. It's those formative years. So this is something that does truly impact them as they get older. So that social dynamic carries a lot of weight. And one of the first things they talk about here, Joe, and I'm reading it, is so you got the social dynamic focused on how interactions with peers, societal expectations, and feelings of belonging or lack thereof impact behavior. So when it talks about lack thereof, Joe, we're also talking about a lot of generalized animosity. And what I mean by that is if I'm having problems with a group of kids, instead of me being able just to deal with those group of kids, I find it maybe easier just to step back and just maybe everyone's like that. Maybe it's not just these group of kids. Maybe it's just everyone. So at that point here, instead of me dealing with the conflict of facing those individuals, I settle into thinking this is just how people are. And that starts the kind of the engine moving into lack of empathy, lack of really any type of relationships that can bring about that human connection. Would you agree, Joe?
Yeah, especially in this specific case, because this kid had a lot going on in his life. As I understand, they were evicted from their home, and the mother and father split and went separate ways, along with the siblings. And he wound up going to a new school. And as much as I hate to say it, school nowadays it's kind of a cruel place to be. Kids are can be cruel in this day and age. And when you go to a new school, it's kind of like anything you do in life. That first impression is everything. And if you get a bad first impression, they in his mind, they're not people anymore. They become objects.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying, Joe, because that want to belong, especially at the very beginning, could push someone. Because at the end, literally, if I'm coming into a new school, my initial impression is going to be my foundation. Yep. So, that's going to be hard for me to cover from the moment I go in and all of a sudden everybody's pushing me away. That's going to be the base. And mind you, guys, I don't have any positive experiences to counter influence that. All I have is entering the school, and either it's maybe just a combination of the past, because we don't know how he was treated at other schools, or just that initial impression where if I can't lean on enough positive experiences to counter the negative, my whole world starts to become negative. So one of the things that they always look for when it comes to social dynamic is, do we have revenge or retaliation? So youth shooters often seek revenge for perceived wrongs, such as bullying, rejection, or feeling mistreated by peers, teachers, or other authority figures. They may believe violence will restore their sense of power and status. And the example here is school shooters frequently cite being bullied or socially ostracized as their primary motivation for retaliation. And guys, mind you guys, even if the teachers weren't directly involved in the bullying, the person could think of them as, well, you could have stopped it. You could have prevented it. Even if I'm not the one that brought it up, you probably saw it and you did nothing. So when they go in, they start to justify everything. Just kind of fits into this generalized animosity where even if you weren't a part of it, you didn't do nothing to stop it. Does that make sense? Because in this case here, it looks like he killed 2 students and 2 teachers. Now, granted, we'll cover a little bit more in, some people just go for as many killings as they can right away, kind of like the mass shooter. But in this case here, it could be, again, we're just throwing things out there. It could be that, I'm cold to everyone, because at this point here, even if you weren't bullying me, no one helped me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And we really don't know. We really don't know why the teachers were actually shot in this. We don't know if they were, if it was meant for them to get shot, or if they just maybe, got in the way of trying to protect students and got shot. And once you hit that mindset, and unfortunately, I've been not, the bullying thing to the point where I want to go on a shooting rampage, but there have been times in all our lives where, you hear enough negative, then you start projecting that on everybody. You know, it's everybody's fault. Nobody did nothing to make the situation better for me. Nobody attempted to stop this situation, so everybody kind of gets grouped together in the same mindset. You know, in your mind. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's weird to see. You know, we don't know what his specific motive was or what his intent was. Was it there to, you know, was he there to shoot the students? Was he there to actually shoot the faculty? You know, there's a lot of uncertainties and a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, and we don't obviously know what was reinforced at home either. We don't know if the father, in some case, by buying the gun, supported the child in what they wanted to do. So we don't know the mindset of the father, or if the father was just negligent and we're just buying a gun for a 14-year-old. We also, this kind of crosses into what Joe said, but we have the social isolation, alienation. So again, this relates to the social dynamics. Remember, guys, he just came to the school, as Joe mentioned. So he's already an outsider. So, you know, I don't know if he was already an outsider at other schools. I just know when he came in here, there wasn't enough positive experiences. So pushing a child away or just bullying during those first days where there's not enough positive experiences to counter against will force the child to or force, and guys, we're not minimizing or negating what they've done, but we'll force the youth, let's just say the youth, because it is a youth, we'll force the youth to feel isolated or alienated. And guys, that's those two feelings, isolated and alienated, those are very strong feelings to have, because when you become isolated and alienated, you are literally by yourself on your own. This is the us versus them. You know, that's another thing you gotta be wary of, is once you become isolated and alienated, there's an us versus them mentality that could develop. So you have youth shooters often feel disconnected or isolated from peers, family, or society. This alienation breeds resentment, leading to violent acts as a means to lash out against those they perceive as responsible for their isolation. So, you know, it comes here where it does first go into resentment first. And then we have that need to belong. And then eventually it's going to start into some level of just being angry, because at the end of the day, they just won't accept you in. And now I feel just by myself and alone. And that's kind of where the generalized animosity comes in, because when the person feels isolated or alienated, they don't just feel isolated or alienated from the people that are bullying them. They're also feeling isolated, alienated from anybody that could maybe even help them. They just decide, I give up. You know, if they're not coming here to help me, I'm not even going to ask for help, because they should know. They should know I need it. And the example here is many youth shooters describe feeling like outcasts, harboring feelings of hatred towards those they perceive as popular or socially successful. So, I mean, that kind of combines with even the bullying, because the bullying could force someone obviously into isolation. And the funny thing is sometimes all they need is one friend. One friend can turn everything around. But that isolation is definitely a defining factor. Would you agree, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is that one person to show interest or to show empathy into somebody's emotions, and you know, kind of tame the beast, if you will. But you know, it's weird. You know, what gets me is, you know, in this situation with the Georgia shooting is, you know, this kid was on the FBI's radar a year prior. So I don't know what was going on then, other than, you know, they had tracked the threat that was made online about a school to his residence. You know, obviously there was something there to begin with, you know, as far as that goes. So yeah, I mean, maybe the father, you know, after everything kind of happened, the father thought maybe a new environment would help. You know, and sometimes a new environment, you know, a fresh start's not always a good thing. You know, being thrusted into a new environment with the unknown and no friends, you know, it's unsettling. And, you know, if you're being bullied right off the bat the day you get there, and you don't have any allies on your side, you know, things, I can see where things get overwhelming, because that's, you know, we see it every day with the schools now. I mean, you hear about all these bullying fights and things that are going on, and you wonder, you know, if this kid had any allies, you know, any of these kids had allies on their side, you know, would this have happened?
Yeah, and guys, there's two other ones. Obviously, the big thing here that when you see what active shooter is going to be revenge or retaliation, kind of connected to isolation and alienation, because I believe it's the isolation, alienation that comes first before the person decides to revenge or retaliate. And I think that move to isolate themselves enables them to want to go into that revenge or retaliation, because as I said, it crosses into the us versus them, in some level, so isolation probably comes first through the negative actions, and then the person decides, what, I'm done with this. I'm going to have to do something about it, however extreme. And this really probably is defined by a win-loss in their mind. I could get this off, and now it's my turn to win. And usually they may result in guns or whatnot, because they may not have the physical strength to go ahead and deal with their threats, through their own means. They have to grab the weapon, and the weapon in their mind kind of gives them the edge, and also may even give them a little bit more courage. To be honest with you, that once you got a kid that's being bullied, maybe the concern is maybe I can't fight back. But then once the kid gets a hand on the weapon, that is an enabler, So if you're a parent and you see that if your kid's open with you and you see that your kid's being bullied, the last thing you want to do is, provide him with a gun to protect himself. You may want to try to realize that in his mind, that's an equalizer. Just saying. Now, there are two other things that they usually look at as well, I've noticed. This still deals with the social dynamic, but this is more maybe attention-seeking behavior for at least one of them. But the one I got is desire for attention or notoriety. So some shooters seek recognition, often influenced by social dynamics, where they feel they still could feel unnoticed or undervalued, but you still have people that could have that mindset where I'm going to become famous. So they get their weapons and pretty much they just go at it. They just try to get as many kills as they can because they want to have those numbers racked up. That's their mindset. So even if you look at them and it's like, well, this person may not have had a problem in school before, it doesn't matter. Their mindset is not correct. They're just going right in to go ahead and say, you know what? I'm going to take out everybody. I want to be famous. I want to be the most famous active shooter of all time. And it's funny because then when they start looking up and doing their research, the active shooter becomes statistics that they now feel have to be like a record that has to be beat. It's like literally a game for them. Oh, that's the highest. Fine. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do one or two more and I'll be at the top of that chart. And then they say they may want to leave a lasting impression and see violence as a way to achieve fame. That's what we talked about, or infamy. An example, many shooters reference or emulate past high-profile shooters driven by a desire to achieve similar notoriety. And we talked about that, right? I mean, there's many active shooter cases in the past that do have high numbers. So if you got someone here that literally wants to compete with them or compare with them, there may not be much of a motive, but the fact is for them, they're looking for a high score. Does that make sense? And they, to me, are probably the most dangerous ones because they're going in guns a-blazing.
Yeah, it's scary. When you hear about these shootings, starting from way back, even with the Columbine shooting, as time progressed, it's weird and it's unsettling how, for them, it pretty much emulated a video game, I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. So I might as well be the best I can be at it and get the high score. And, you look at the shootings as time has gone on and, things have progressed without a doubt. It's like I said, it's unsettling how, in their mind, people aren't people anymore. They're just objects in the way they have to clear out. And, for them, like I said, it becomes a video game. And, if I'm going to do this, I might as well get the high score.
Yeah. And guys, that could be someone that's already come into this world or developed. You could have people that could have treated these people well. It doesn't matter at this point. People are objects to me. I don't have a sense of empathy. It wasn't cultivated in me. Maybe when I was younger, again, not giving excuses, but my parents beat me or whatever it is. The point is they don't develop empathy. That's the big thing. And when they don't develop empathy, everybody kind of seems to be an object. So you're right. They go in guns a-blazing. And the other thing we got is the grievance-driven ideology. So I guess, sometimes guys, the need to belong could become so overwhelming that we wind up not thinking logically. We wind up just wanting to have somebody. So sometimes you have children that could have been isolated, but they still want that need to belong. So what they do is they connect to an ideology, like let's say in some cases a white supremacist group. It doesn't mean that they've ever been belong. That doesn't mean they belong to a white supremacist group, but they're hoping by doing this, that group will connect with them and give them that sense of belonging. So again, you got description, youth can adopt extreme ideologies. So you got political, religious, or racial through social networks or online communities. These ideologies may justify violence as a means to address perceived societal grievances. And the example here would be youth shooters influenced by extremist groups or hate-based forums may view their actions as part of a larger ideological battle. And just to say, I know they say ideological battle, I'm going to add the need to belong to that. I am, because you're connecting to a group and you may feel that this is the need that ultimately solidifies you as a member within that group. Because we've seen cases in the past where you find out later on it was racially motivated, let's say, but the person was an outcast in the school. Yeah, I know, but the person still has that underneath need to want to belong. So if they're not finding the belonging in the school, then they go to groups that are like-minded. And then eventually, here's the sad thing about it all. When you have that want to belong and it does supersede like just logical thinking, people can influence you in the negative way because you're being driven by that want to belong. So when you have people that want to belong and you connect them to people that can influence them in a negative way, so there's no counter influence, they can just influence them in a negative way, the roads that they can take or are willing to take, we just wouldn't be able to comprehend. And that's truly when you look at that person and say, wow, I can't believe that's my son or that's my daughter. It is. It's just that they shifted from your influence to the influence of whatever these groups are. And most of the time they get attracted to those groups, I believe, because for some reason they're looking for power, for some reason. So I know that if I'm, this group can give me that. So I'm going to go ahead and do something in the name of this group. And then hopefully they take me in, and that obligation, because maybe I've done for them, they'll take me in and love me like I'm one of their own. And guys, here's the funny thing. For someone that feels isolated and alone, it's not about how they're being loved or even the reason for them being loved. It's just the fact that they feel loved. What's your thoughts on that grievance-driven ideology? You're muted, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, on the grievance side of that, I kind of agree with your perspective on that. It's being grievance driven. We've all lost people that have kind of changed our outlook on things on life. But I can honestly say that in the grieving process, I've never had an outlook that made me want to do anything like this. It's a complex scenario.
It is. And I want to now go into now guys, sometimes these things blend. But I want to start talking about the mental health component too, because the mental health component is obviously something that plays out. I think it all kind of connects. We could actually, through the social dynamic, can push the person into mental health concerns. I mean, isolated and alienation could make the person fall into depression, could make them want to commit suicide. These are people that now feel hopeless. And that's a scary thing, because once the people start feeling hopeless, they don't care because their life wasn't going in a positive direction anyway. So I might as well take a few people down with me, those that I feel caused it. So for the mental health, you got mental health struggles. So you have many youth shooters exhibit signs of untreated mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, or personality disorders. These struggles often drive feelings of hopelessness. We talked about the anger or the desire to act out violently. So the example here, shooters frequently display symptoms of severe depression, and some may have had previously psychiatric treatment or diagnosis. And you got to remember something, guys. Sometimes this act of violence is their way to get control of so many things. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you got, if you're being pushed, if you're being isolated, and all of a sudden that makes you depressed, maybe for that moment of hope that you're looking for, the hope doesn't come in working it out with individuals to see what's happening, but rather ultimate control. That's my hope. If right now I have no control, I'm not looking for a piece of control. I want my control back. And the best way they can get that control is literally going back to that school and, just taking out people so they can establish that level of control over someone else's life in comparison to how people have controlled theirs. It's just that they're not going to come back from it. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Oh shit, I haven't had my
yeah. I mean, mental health plays a big factor, especially when, like you said, when a person feels hopeless, they got nothing else to lose. It may not be to the point where, they're suicidal, but it can make them homicidal as well. They may care enough not to hurt themselves, but they don't care enough not to hurt you because, again, you're not a person anymore. You're an object. You're a bad feeling that needs to go away. There's plenty of reasons that mental health can play a factor in this. Not just the hopelessness, but the feeling of being backed into a corner, with no way out, and unfortunately, your mindset reverts to this is the only way it can happen. This is the only way you can get yourself out of the corner. And bullying itself could cause mental health issues. It can cause your self-esteem to to go to an all-time low. It can cause you to feel that, being that type of bullying individual is okay. And, well, if he can bully, then I can bring a gun. It's mental health plays a lot of factors, and the mental health, we can dissect a million different ways on how it can apply to this scenario.
Yeah, and guys, also with suicidal ideation. Now, guys, they all kind of bleed in together. So I'm just dealing with them in, I'm not going to say an isolated fashion, but just introducing to you the different categories here. But the suicidal ideation for here, in many cases, young shooters intend to end their lives during or after the attack, either by their own hands or through confrontation with law enforcement. Suicide by cop violence becomes the final act of self-destruction. And there's several shooters that actually have left suicide notes or discussed plans to die during the attack. You got to remember something. That is the ultimate control right there. Because again, if they get caught, they go back into the control of someone else. They go back into the system. They go back into structured days where they're locked up and waiting for the outcome of the court. And they're not going to give the courts that outcome. They don't want to. So for those that are suicidal ideation, I know it's funny. Yes, it is the end result of falling into hopelessness, but I don't think the suicide truly is enabled by hopelessness to some extent. I think the suicide is because it's regained hope and a full level of control. I actually think it's the opposite when they decide to do that. Even if it's suicide by cop, they still believe they're ending life on their own terms. So I went out and guns a-blazing, so you're going to have to take me out. And they're basically, in their mind, taking control. So yes, I do feel that kind of all the backdrop of this is some level of hopelessness. But once they go into that active shooter mode and once they start moving forward, getting ready to take people out, I don't think they're no longer hopeless in their mind. I think now they're finally taking control and they're stepping out from feeling trapped. Now they'll fall back into hopelessness again if they don't take their own lives and they get caught and they wind up getting, within the system now. So I think that's a unique thing. I think that is the end result of just what they wanted to accomplish: total and utter control. First I'm going to control them, and then I'm going to end life on my terms and not anybody else's. And I also think they look at that as a win too. I do. Because I think they know that, okay, there's going to be consequences for this. And I'm not willing to give those consequences to the people that have forced me into this. I'm not going to give them that level of control over the outcome. I'm going to take total control of that. So I do what I got to do. And then the moment I feel I'm going to get caught, I either take myself out, or if I don't have the courage to do that, I just point at the officers and then, and let them end me. Does that make sense, Joe, or no?
Yeah, I mean, even in your worst mental health status, the one thing that they desire is to be in control, whether it be the control of the outcome, the control of the situation, the control of their decisions. I mean, even in their worst state, all they want is to be in control, to be the one that sets the tone for whatever scenario is going on.
I agree. And I got one more for for mental health. I'm sure there's more, guys, like Joe said. But let me open it up because it just closed first. There it goes. The lack of empathy we talked about, which is the moral disengagement. So youth shooters often exhibit a lack of empathy towards their victims, which allows them to commit violent acts without feeling guilt or remorse. This moral disengagement can result from psychological conditions that impair emotional connection. So examples could many attackers view their victims as symbols rather than people, making it easier to rationalize their violence. We kind of discussed that, if you're not connected to that human element for some reason, if you lack empathy, it kind of really fuels your efforts. I'm not shooting a person, I'm shooting a object that's been in my way, or an object that has been nothing but disrespectful. And I think sometimes even when they rationalize it, they use words that remove that human element. And remember, guys, objects can be replaced. So when you look at things as an object, objects are replaceable. Does that make sense, Joe, for that last part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. You're just a chess piece on the chessboard that's being laid down. They think when the game's over that piece is going to stand back up, and then that's not always the case. But for them in their worst crisis state, they're considered objects. They're not considered people, living, breathing things. They're something else that's standing between you and what I want to get to.
Yes, and now the last one I got seems to be the controversy. It's the fascination with violence. I know back in the day, Grand Theft Auto was a problem. A bunch of games that had shooting. The funny thing is, the question was does the game make the individual into who they are, or is the person just attracted to those type of games to begin with? So obviously, in a household where you have a kid that's being bullied and whatnot, playing a game like that could be reliving a fantasy, and then maybe at one moment they're going to wind up carrying it out. But a lot of kids, they have empathy. They don't think that way. They know the game's just the game, so I wasn't a real big fan of blaming the game. I was just, it's more of why you playing it, as opposed to playing the game. Like the game doesn't make you, this violent killer, because there's a lot of people that play violent games and are the friendliest people in the world, but there are some that they play violent games because it's a way to maybe act out of fantasy, and however they connect that violence to what they're dealing with in the real world, that could become a motivator for them. But it's not the main thing. It's pretty much the person's fascination with it and what they're making the game, what they're playing the game for. So what I have here, Joe, is fascination with violence. So we have youth shooters may develop a preoccupation with violent media such as video games, movies, or online forums. This can desensitize them to the reality of violence and make it seem like a viable solution to their problems. Many shooters have a history of obsessively consuming violent content, and some meticulously plan their attacks, even collecting weapons or writing about violent fantasies. But again, they're going in there with a different purpose. If I'm going to play a violent game, I'm playing it just to have fun. At the end of the day, I'm able to put the game back and go play with my children. And I've been playing games of all types my whole life, but then you get some that they're literally going down there because that could be their therapy. That could be because when they're playing games, here I am, let's say I'm playing Grand Theft Auto and, I'm robbing cars, individually computer guys that I'm taking cars from, but in their mind, that's not a car. I'm beating up Joe Pomponio. I'm beating up Russ Hamilton. Maybe they start putting names on and they actually embrace the character as them. I don't run around saying I'm the guy from Grand Theft Auto. Once I turn off the game, the game's off. But some of these guys, when they play those games or watch those movies, they connect to those roles on a very, very intimate level. And they may even go so far as blending both lives. So whatever person you connect to who has that negative image, maybe the people that they're taking out tend to be people that And now eventually you can't separate the two. So eventually you become that person, again, it's you tend to idolize the wrong things. I've been playing Grand Theft Auto my whole life. I don't idolize the characters, but the funny thing is it's also in what type of role model they're looking for. When they're so full of hate and rage, the role models that they could be looking for, people that deal with beating up people. to express hate and rage, and that could be the person that says, well, that person can go in and they could solve their problems. And, maybe John Wick. Well, what do you respect John Wick for? That he's willing to, fight for his dog because he loves his dog? No, I like the fact that he beats the shit out of people because they killed his dog. Some people may relate to it because I know he's violent, man, but he really loves the dog. So they're kind of attracted to the love for the dog. But there are some people that just like his ass kicking method, regardless of the reasons. He's able to deal with confrontation physically, and therefore, in their mind, that physical confrontation gives them the win. It gives them a level up, because I guarantee you, if you keep pushing somebody, eventually, if they can't resolve it through communicating in their mind, their thing is, I need the one up, and their thing is having a dream every day of beating the hell out of you and, just getting back to you. And then mix that up with puberty, mix that up with hormones raging and all this other stuff you got going on. Violence becomes their answer. What's your thoughts on that, Joe, as we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I like you. I've played every first-person shooter game that that's come out since the inception of the first-person shooters, even back from the old PC days. And I too, have played Grand Theft Auto. The main thing about video games is, video games is a good escape for blowing off steam and just letting things go away. However, you have to have something going on in your life, some sort of influence that kind of gives you that balance that, okay, enough of the video games, let's go outside and do something productive. You got to have that actual balance. There's a difference between a kid, such as me, that played video games. And, I was blessed to have a father and a mother that were constantly in my life, that, hey, that's enough of the video game. Come on, let's go outside. We got a fence to put up, or, we got a car to fix, or we got this to do. We got that to do. To have something that keeps you level headed, that keeps you in reality and keeps you from fantasizing every scenario that it's a video game. Like I said, I've played them all, Grand Theft Auto. I've played all the Call of Duties. I've, every first person shooter that there is, but I know that I still got to go to work. I know that work is not a fantasy game. It's not something that, I can associate with a video game. I like I said, I've played them all too, but you got to have that equal balance in your life. You had a hard day at work. What do? You come home and you jump on the PlayStation console and you play a shooter and blow off steam, or, you play Grand Theft Auto and steal cars or whatever. Video games are a good escape as a temporary measure, as long as you have a good balance of something going on in your life outside the video game. Something that still gives you some sort of emotional connect to humanity. Once you're done playing that video game, you got to have that level. You got somebody who stays in their room for 3-4 days at a time playing first person shooters and doesn't come out and has any interaction with the outside world other than through a headset and a microphone. That's going to create some issues. Video games are, like I said, video games. I wouldn't particularly say video games are to blame. When it comes down to it, is basically the individual that's to blame. I mean, hell, we've all, me and you both have played video games and we turned out okay, I think.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit. And guys, yeah, and remember, back in the day, this was all about, still maybe even today, provide excuses as to why people do what they do. And I think the question was, well, why were they fascinated with that? Why are they playing the game? I mean, that's the key. Let's stop putting it on games and movies, and you have to start asking the child, why are you watching it? And you find that there's a bigger meaning behind it. That's why some people go, well, why can't I play violent? Well, I haven't done anything wrong. And I think the question was, stop blaming the games and start asking the person why they're playing it. Why are they watching this movie? That was the key. And then discover through their fascination that they're really playing out of fantasy. And right now the game and the movies are the safest way to do that. But there's only a matter of time before those dreams become reality if they're playing in that fashion, because they're going to need to meet that need. It's not going to be good enough. Eventually, the video game is not going to solve their problem. For us, it always does. It's a simple escape. It takes my mind off work. I'm not, that's what I need. Take my mind off work. But in their mind, this is means to an end. So eventually when they don't get what they want here because there's no satisfaction here for them just playing games, and they're going to eventually say, you know what, screw it, I'm going to be like him. That's who I want to be like. You ask these young kids nowadays, who you look up to, they'll tell you Scarface, but then you look at the context and it makes sense. It's just, hey Joe, anything like the same? Okay,
you think about it, for us back in the days, hell, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, the whole Dirty Harry series, for me, that guy was a hero to me, and it wasn't because he carried a 44 Magnum and shot everything in sight. It was, it's because he stood tall, he stood firm, and he had no fear. There's a big difference. There's a big difference on how you emulate, not so much emulate, but how you idolize somebody. Whether it be an actor, whether it be a video game, whether it be a rap artist, it's not what you idolize, it's how you idolize it and why you idolize it.
And that's the key. That's what has to be explored instead of blaming everything, see what the attraction is. Hey Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I hate that the school shootings continue to happen. Hopefully the full story will come out soon. Everything's still pretty in its infancy right now as far as news and reasonings and stuff, especially with the father being charged. Hopefully we get to learn more details later. I hate that these shootings continue to happen. We have all these drills that we're running in schools and protections that we think are in place, but yet it still continues to happen. It's not always, we can armchair quarterback this thing all day long as to why it happened or how it could have happened or how this kid got his hands on a gun. We don't, like I said, we don't know the full story yet, as to how things kind of went down, if there were any kind of signs, immediate signs that this was going to happen. But obviously something was there in the previous balance because, the FBI made contact with this kid at one point in time, a year prior, and all the things that they're going to have to look at in the near future to see what was going on in this kid's life is, I would hate to be one of the investigating officers into this thing because I think the picture is going to look pretty bleak, but ultimately, he was old enough to know right from wrong. He was old enough to know what choices he was making. And, I don't know whether he thought about the consequences of what his actions were going to do to get his father in trouble. A lot of kids don't think about that. Once they're set on something, they just go with it and go. They don't think about consequences until it, hits them in the ass later. So, I hate it that this happens. And, when it comes down to it, parents, stay involved in your kids' lives, be that positive role model, be that positive influence, take the time. Don't let work overrule your responsibilities or negate your responsibilities at home to be with your kids and teach your kids.
Yeah, and again, we don't know much about the father's involvement. It looks like they're believing he could have bought the gun for the kid at this point, which I'm sure they'll find out and they'll release, at least as of recording this. But again, giving a 14-year-old kid a gun, without really, what are you giving the gun for? I mean, I think we know enough of our children to know if they're dealing with issues or not. And if they're quiet, I know me, I'm going to keep on going you got to tell me what's wrong. I'm not going to let them isolate themselves every day. They are my kids. I'm not going to get used to the habit where I come home and we don't say nothing and we only see each other at dinner. No, I want to know how your day was, what's going on, and then help them find ways to resolve problems or balance it. If I can't control, this negative actions in school, he's got to have something to look forward to when they get home. Do we maybe maybe figure it out to find ways to make this person more social? Maybe it is the child. Maybe the child I have right now is not a social child. Maybe I got to work on that with him. And, so again, it's not to minimize or negate, but it's the understanding and effort to prevent. And again, do you have someone that truly is a victim? Because he is a young age at this point. So he's developing. So I get that. Or do you have someone that truly would have grown into a monster anyway later on, even though what they did right now is truly disastrous? I mean, what would he have done a lot later if this boy became an adult? Imagine the danger that he could have put onto the world. It's just a scary situation. That's all it is. So I wanted to put something out there. For a young kid like this, it's horrible what they did. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to minimize or negate what they've done, but it's still a kid. I still think there's some level of responsibility over that kid at this age, a lot different than dealing with a man that we've talked about him before. This is still a kid. So I would like to know more about what was going on in these developmental stages here that may have caused him to decide that this was the best route. And one more thing, guys, not just appearance, it's the peers and everything too. I mean, you want to play around, play games, and bully people. Again, I'm not looking to minimize. I mean, this is, not something we want to happen, but sometimes we also have to check ourselves. I mean, no one deserves to get killed. I'm not saying that at this level. I mean, but, sometimes we could be just fueling the monster and doing more to aggravate the situation than to actually do something to resolve it. As always, guys, the show is taped. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.